It was another routine day at Jefferson High School, where the morning bell signaled a flood of students into their classrooms. In Ms. Carlson's advanced history class, a mix of chatter and laughter filled the air as students settled into their seats. Among them was 14-year-old Marcus Brown, a bright and curious black student with a love for learning. Marcus was seated near the front of the classroom, neatly dressed in his favorite striped shirt and khakis, his backpack resting beside his desk. He had always been passionate about history, especially stories of resilience and courage. But today was different. Ms. Carlson, a strict but well-liked teacher, began the lesson by assigning a challenging group activity. Students were required to research and present on key figures from the civil rights movement. While the other students formed groups with their friends, Marcus found himself working alone. As the activity unfolded, Marcus poured his heart into his research. His chosen figure was Frederick Douglass, a man he deeply admired for his determination and eloquence. When it was time to present, Marcus walked to the front of the class with a mixture of nerves and excitement. But as he began to speak, a murmur of snickers broke out in the back of the room. It started with Ethan, a popular but mischievous student known for his sharp tongue. "Frederick Douglass, really?" he sneered. "Why not choose someone who actually mattered?" The comment sparked laughter among his friends, and Marcus felt the heat rise in his face. He hesitated for a moment but pressed on, determined to share his presentation. Yet, as he continued, the giggles turned into outright laughter. "Look at how serious he is," Emma, another classmate, whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "He thinks he's some kind of historian." Marcus's voice faltered as the ridicule grew louder. Ms. Carlson, instead of intervening, simply watched with an amused smirk. "All right, class, let's settle down," she said half-heartedly, doing little to stop the disruption. By the time Marcus finished, the laughter had subsided, but the sting of humiliation lingered. He returned to his seat, his head low, avoiding eye contact with anyone. The bell rang, and students poured out of the classroom, still chuckling and whispering about Marcus's presentation. Left behind, Marcus packed his things slowly, replaying the scene in his mind. The laughter echoed in his ears, louder than the sound of the bell. As he left the room, a single tear slid down his cheek, but Marcus wiped it away quickly. Marcus walked down the bustling hallways of Jefferson High, keeping his head low and avoiding eye contact. Whispers and giggles trailed behind him, with Ethan and his friends leading the charge. "Hey, historian!" Ethan called out mockingly. "Maybe next time, pick someone people actually care about." Marcus clenched his fists, the words cutting deep. He had always tried to stay out of trouble, focusing on his academics and avoiding conflicts, but the taunts made it difficult. He felt out of place, like an outsider in a school where he should have felt safe. When lunch came around, Marcus found his usual spot in the corner of the cafeteria. He often sat alone, preferring the quiet over the noisy crowds. Today, though, even his sanctuary felt invaded. Across the room, a table of students erupted into laughter, and Marcus caught glimpses of them mimicking his presentation gestures. "Hey, Marcus, want to teach us about Frederick Douglass?" one of the students shouted, waving their hands dramatically as the others roared with laughter. Marcus pushed his tray aside, the appetite completely gone. The humiliation wasn't just in the classroom anymore, it had followed him everywhere. When Marcus got home that evening, his mother, Vanessa, immediately noticed something was wrong. Vanessa was a strong, supportive woman who had always encouraged Marcus to embrace his identity and stand up for himself. But today, Marcus seemed defeated. "How was school, baby?" she asked, setting a plate of his favorite spaghetti on the table. "It was fine," Marcus mumbled, avoiding her gaze as he picked at his food. Vanessa sat down beside him, concern etched across her face. "Marcus, I know when something's wrong. You can talk to me." Marcus hesitated, but the weight of the day overwhelmed him. "It's just kids at school," he finally admitted. They laughed at me during my presentation. They made fun of me because I talked about Frederick Douglass." Vanessa's expression softened with both sadness and anger. "They did what? And your teacher allowed it?" Marcus nodded. "She didn't really do anything to stop them. I just want to forget about it." But Vanessa wasn't one to let things slide. "Marcus, you are brilliant and you should never feel ashamed of that," she said firmly. "We're going to handle this. You deserve to be treated with respect." That night, Vanessa called Marcus's father, David, who lived a few towns away but stayed deeply involved in Marcus's life. David was a history professor at a local university and shared Marcus's passion for historical figures like Frederick Douglass. When Vanessa explained what had happened, David's voice was calm but resolute. "This isn't just about a bad day at school," he said. "This is about teaching those kids, and that teacher, a lesson in respect. I'll drive down tomorrow. Marcus and I will take care of this together." Hearing his father's determination gave Marcus a glimmer of hope. Maybe this wasn't the end of the story. Maybe it was just the beginning. The next morning, Marcus walked into school with a mix of nerves and anticipation. He wasn't sure what his parents had planned, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let the laughter define him. Something was about to change, and for the first time in days, he felt a spark of courage. Little did he know, his father's arrival would turn the tables in a way no one in Jefferson High saw coming. The next day, Marcus was sitting quietly in homeroom when a familiar face walked through the school's main doors. His father, David Brown, clad in a sharp suit and carrying a leather briefcase, strode into Jefferson High with a purpose that commanded attention. David had always believed in the power of education and respect, but hearing about the humiliation his son endured ignited a fire in him. Today, he wasn't just Marcus's father. He was a professor, a role model, and someone who wasn't afraid to stand up to injustice. After signing in at the office, David requested a meeting with Ms. Carlson and Principal Harris. His calm demeanor didn't mask the weight of his expectations. When the staff realized he was a history professor, the tone of the meeting shifted. Meanwhile, Marcus sat in Ms. Carlson's history class, bracing himself for another day of ridicule. The previous day's mockery still hung heavy in the air. Ethan leaned over from his desk and whispered, "Hey Marcus, you ready for round 2? Before Marcus could respond, the classroom door opened. Principal Harris entered, followed by David, whose confident presence filled the room. Marcus's eyes widened in surprise, and the room fell silent. "Good morning, Ms. Carlson," David began, his voice steady but commanding. "I'm David Brown, Marcus's father. I'd like to address your class if you don't mind." Ms. Carlson hesitated, clearly caught off guard. "Of course, Mr. Brown," she said, stepping aside. David turned to the class, his gaze sweeping across the students, who now sat in stunned silence. "Yesterday, my son stood here to share a presentation about Frederick Douglass, one of the greatest orators and leaders in American history," David began. Instead of being met with the respect and curiosity every student deserves, he was ridiculed by both his peers and, more disturbingly, by the very teacher who should have supported him. Ms. Carlson's face flushed, but she said nothing. "Let me tell you something about Frederick Douglass," David continued, his voice rising with passion. "He was born into slavery and taught himself to read and write. He escaped to freedom and used his knowledge to fight for justice and equality. He was mocked, belittled, and faced unimaginable adversity, yet he never gave up. He turned that mockery into strength, and that's exactly what Marcus will do." The students sat frozen, their earlier arrogance replaced by shame. Even Ethan, who had led the ridicule, avoided David's piercing gaze. "Classrooms are meant to be places of learning, not humiliation," David said firmly. "And I hope today serves as a reminder that every single one of you has the power to uplift those around you instead of tearing them down." Turning to Ms. Carlson, he added, "And as educators, You have a responsibility to model that behavior. Anything less is a failure, not on the part of the student but on you." Ms. Carlson's mouth opened, but no words came out. She nodded silently, clearly chastened. As David finished, he placed a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder. "I'm proud of you, son," he said. "Don't let anyone dim your light." The bell rang, and students began filing out of the classroom, their expressions a mixture of guilt and awe. For the first time, Marcus felt a sense of pride instead of shame. He glanced at Ethan, who avoided eye contact entirely, and smiled to himself. The tables had turned, and Marcus knew this was a moment he'd never forget. But the day wasn't over yet. David wasn't done making his point, not just to the students, but to the entire school. After the classroom confrontation, David wasn't ready to let things rest. He knew that if Marcus had faced ridicule here, other students might have too. He wanted to ensure Jefferson High became a place of respect and inclusion, not humiliation. Principal Harris, sensing the gravity of the situation, arranged a special assembly for later that day. Word spread quickly throughout the school that Marcus's father was addressing everyone, and curiosity buzzed through the halls. By the time the students gathered in the auditorium, the air was thick with anticipation. Teachers and staff sat in the front rows, while the students filled the rest of the seats. Marcus sat near the middle, nervously glancing at his father, who stood confidently at the podium. David began with a calm but powerful voice. "Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Brown, and I'm here today not just as a parent, but as someone who believes deeply in the power of education to change lives." He paused, scanning the room. But education cannot thrive in an environment where students feel ridiculed or unsupported. Yesterday, my son, Marcus, stood in front of a class to share his thoughts on Frederick Douglass, a man who symbolizes the power of perseverance and education. Instead of encouragement, he faced mockery and disrespect. The room grew silent, the weight of his words sinking in. David continued, "Frederick Douglass once said, 'It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men.' That's why I'm here today. It's not just about my son, Marcus. It's about all of you. Each of you has the potential to be great, to learn, and to grow. But that potential can only be realized if we create an environment where respect and kindness thrive, not ridicule and prejudice." He looked toward the front rows where the teachers were seated. "As educators, you have the immense responsibility of shaping these young minds. The way you treat your students sets the tone for how they treat one another. If a teacher allows mockery or contributes to it, it sends a message that such behavior is acceptable, and that is a message that can do lasting harm." David's gaze swept across the students. "And to those of you who laughed at Marcus, I want you to think about why. What did you gain from putting someone else down? Did it make you feel powerful, or was it just easier to join the crowd instead of standing up for what's right?" At this point, Ethan, sitting near the back, sank lower in his seat, his face flushed with embarrassment. Other students exchanged guilty glances, the impact of David's words cutting through the auditorium. "Marcus had the courage to stand up and speak about something he believed in," David continued. "That takes strength, and I'm proud of him for that. But I want to challenge each of you to do the same, to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard, to use your voice not to tear others down, but to lift them up." David stepped away from the podium momentarily and gestured toward Marcus. "My son has a lot to teach you all, not just about history, but about resilience and determination. Marcus, would you come up here for a moment?" The auditorium erupted into soft murmurs as Marcus hesitated, then slowly rose from his seat. Encouraged by his father's reassuring nod, he walked to the stage. David placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "This young man has a bright future ahead of him, and no amount of laughter or mockery can take that away. I want everyone here to understand that your words and actions have power. Use them wisely." The audience fell silent, absorbing the lesson. Marcus, though nervous, felt a swell of pride. For the first time he felt truly seen and supported, not just by his father, but by the message being delivered to the entire school. As the assembly ended, Principal Harris stepped up to the microphone. "Thank you, Mr. Brown, for your powerful words. Jefferson High is committed to ensuring this school becomes a place where every student feels respected and valued. Starting today, we will implement workshops to address bullying and racism, and we'll work to create a better environment for everyone." Applause erupted in the auditorium, and as Marcus walked back to his seat, he was greeted by nods of approval and even a few whispered apologies from classmates. But the biggest moment came when Ethan, still red-faced and hesitant, approached Marcus after the assembly. "Hey, Marcus," he said quietly. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said those things yesterday. It was wrong." Marcus looked at Ethan for a moment, then nodded. "Thanks, Ethan. Just think before you speak next time." Ethan nodded and walked away, leaving Marcus feeling a small but significant sense of victory. As the day ended, Marcus and his father left the school together. David glanced at his son and said, "You know, Marcus, Frederick Douglass faced far worse than what you did, but he never let it stop him. Neither should you." Marcus smiled. "I won't, Dad. I promise." With his father's words and actions behind him, Marcus felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The lesson he learned wasn't just about standing up for himself. It was about the power of resilience and the importance of having someone believe in you. The days following the assembly marked a noticeable change at Jefferson High School. The students, once so quick to mock and ridicule, seemed more cautious with their words. Conversations that might have spiraled into teasing or bullying were now tinged with reflection. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Marcus walked through the halls with a renewed sense of confidence. The mocking whispers that had once haunted him were now replaced by nods of acknowledgement. Some students even approached him to apologize or offer kind words. It was strange at first, but Marcus appreciated their efforts. In Ms. Carlson's class, things had changed dramatically. She no longer allowed side comments or snickering during presentations, and her tone toward Marcus was more encouraging than dismissive. One day, after class, she stopped Marcus as he was packing up his things. "Marcus, I just wanted to say that your presentation on Frederick Douglass was impressive," she admitted awkwardly. "I should have supported you better, and I'm sorry for that." Marcus looked at her, surprised but appreciative. "Thank you, Ms. Carlson. That means a lot." At home, Marcus shared the news with his parents. Vanessa beamed with pride, while David gave him a knowing smile. "See? Change is possible, son. Sometimes it just takes one voice to start it." But David wasn't finished with his mission. He had been in contact with Principal Harris and the school board, pushing for systemic changes to address bullying and racism at Jefferson High. With his experience as an educator and his passion for justice, he volunteered to lead workshops for teachers and students, focusing on empathy and inclusion. One Saturday morning, Marcus joined his father for one of these workshops. He watched as David captivated the room, weaving stories of historical resilience with practical lessons on respect. Toward the end of the session, David surprised Marcus by inviting him to speak. "Marcus," David said, gesturing toward his son, "would you like to share your perspective? Your voice is powerful, and it can make a difference." Marcus hesitated, feeling the familiar flutter of nerves. But as he looked around the room, he saw faces filled with curiosity and respect. He thought about Frederick Douglass, about his father's unwavering support, and about the strength he'd found within himself. Taking a deep breath, Marcus stepped forward. "Hi, everyone," he began. "I used to think that being laughed at or underestimated meant I wasn't good enough. But I've learned that it's not about what others think. It's about believing in yourself and standing up for what's right. If I can do it, so can you." The room erupted into applause, and Marcus felt a surge of pride. For the first time, he wasn't just a student trying to fit in. He was a leader, someone others could look up to. As he left the workshop with his father, Marcus looked up at him and said, "Thanks, Dad, for everything." David placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "I'm proud of you, son. You've got a bright future ahead. Just remember, your voice can change the world." And with that, Marcus walked away with his head held high, ready to face whatever challenges came next. He knew that life wouldn't always be easy, but he also knew he had the strength, the resilience, and the support to overcome anything.